Hello, everyone. I'm excited to have Dr. Jennifer Thomas on the show today. She is the co-author of a really good book, The 5 Apology Languages, The Secret to Healthy Relationships. She wrote that along with Dr. Gary Chapman, and it's really an awesome book. She's a clinical psychologist, a consultant, TEDx speaker, author, and master facilitator for the 5 love languages. You can check out her website at drjenniferthomas.com. Hello, Jennifer. Thanks so much for being on the show today.
Hey, Eric. Thank you. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, this is such a good topic. Now, I'm passionate about relationships, communication, conflict resolution, and I see making apologies. On one hand, it's a small issue to say, I'm sorry, or I apologize. It can be quick. It can be painless.
Right.
But it is a huge issue. People are estranged, relationships, couples, family members, hear about people giving each other the cold shoulder for years, all because someone's waiting for an apology. So Tell me, why did you write this book? And why is making an apology such a secret to having a healthy relationship?
Well, it's an important topic, and yet I call apologies sort of the wallpaper of life. It's there, but we don't pay much attention to them usually. But people really want their apologies, whether it's in a court of law or in a relationship. People will say, if they would just apologize, it would make such a difference to me. And the concept actually came out of my own marriage. There was a situation where I was apologizing to my husband for having made what I thought was a little mistake. And so I gave him a little apology. I said, "Oh, I'm sorry." But I noticed that he wasn't moving on. He was still frustrated. And we had been married at least 10 years at that time. And so I asked him, "What's wrong?" And he said, "Well, I just wish you would apologize for your mistake." And, if you've been in that situation, now we went from having a frustrated husband to having 2 frustrated people. And I said to him, "Well, I said I was sorry. What did you want to hear?" And his answer I found really interesting. And I want to invite your listeners to think, what do you think JT wanted to hear from Jen? And his answer, he knew it right away. He said, "I wanted you to say you were wrong." And I said, "Oh, okay, I was wrong." Like, to me, that was a synonym, and I didn't mind offering it because I thought it was true. But to him, it meant so much, and I could see how it really turned around our interaction, and the next few hours were really much better than they appeared that they were going to be. And so I thought in my head, spouses don't come with an instruction manual. I wish I had known that he had these different magic words than I did. And so I literally kind of went and wrote it down, like, remember this, when you're in the doghouse and you want to make things better, that's what JT needs to hear. And so as a psychologist in private practice, I got curious about whether other people were missing it with their apologies. Like, you're going to the effort, you're trying to do it, but it's just not hitting the mark. And so I thought about it and got interested in how it's kind of like the love languages, in that people are waiting to receive something and they may not realize that you're actually trying. And I knew Gary Chapman a little bit through some networking. He lives in the same region that I do. And I was really curious about whether he had ever thought of this parallel between how you apologize and how you show love or appreciation. So I just made an appointment. I kind of cold called him, and he said he'd be glad to meet with me. At that time, he was meeting with a lot of people about relationship problems. And so he actually laughed when I told him this idea I had. And I was curious about why that was. And he said, "Well, I'm laughing because I misunderstood when you called. I thought maybe you needed some relationship help." And he was, relieved that JT and I were doing fine. And I just had this idea that I thought might help other people. And he really got excited about it as well. And we began to do some research to look at what is it that people really want to hear in apologies. And our survey results were interesting. We found that there were 5 different things
Mm.
that counted for apologies to people. And I promise we weren't looking for 5, although we know that Gary Chapman really likes that
Worked
number.
out well. It worked out really well.
It worked out great, yeah. So we coined the term apology languages for these 5 different ways of saying my bad and trying to
Hmm.
get relationships back on track.
Can you share what the 5 are and just a brief description of the differences? Some of them are close, and some of them I think are quite different.
That's right. And a framework that I use to help remember them is thinking of past, present, and future.
Hmm.
So the first couple are saying I'm sorry or expressing regret. So we're talking about I'm sorry for what I did in either the far past or the recent past. And then the second one is similar. It's saying I was wrong.
Hmm.
And so those two are kind of interchangeable, but when you add I was wrong, you're accepting responsibility. And for some people, that's really where the sincerity lies. They're waiting to hear you say that. And they're also watching to make sure that you don't kind of claw it back with qualifiers like the
Right.
word but.
Oh, but
We
yeah.
know, no, when you
No,
hear
you.
that, it's like you just erased everything that you said before,
Yep.
and now I'm about to hear what you really think.
Hmm.
But some people will listen to all of that and they'll say, you know what, those are just words, and words are not enough. And so for that person, they might like our third apology language, which is making amends. And
Mm.
that's where you spend your time or your money to make them whole again.
This is mine. This is mine. Restitution.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, good. Do you have a story of how you know that's yours or an example of when it was met?
Someone missed my birthday a few years ago, and I just thought, what are you going to do to make it up? I mean, just all
Right.
I kept thinking is great that you're sorry, but it was kind of like, hey, plan something for it.
Exactly. I'll know you're sincere when you put something else on our calendars.
Hmm.
And that's an important way of making amends and, you know, figuring out is this relationship going to go the distance or am I not that important to them? I can see how you would be, watching and waiting for those amends. And then our fourth and fifth apology languages are turning from the present on towards the future. The fourth one is saying how you're planning to change and how you're going to
Hmm.
prevent a reoccurrence of this problem. So, for example, if you have stood someone up or if you keep being late for important meetings, then apologizing in this way would include something about setting a reminder and maybe even moving it 15 minutes earlier so that you can be sure to show the person you're really my priority and I'm not just going to give you the crumbs.
Hmm.
And then our final apology language is actually a question, and that is, will you please forgive me? And we found in our survey that only 3 or 4% of people most want to hear that. But for them, it's really important. It's like everything
Hmm.
else is just preliminary. And then you might sort of dust it off and think that you're done apologizing, but they're waiting. They're thinking, and give me something more here. Let me know that you understand, especially if this has been a serious offense,
Hmm.
that I get to say whether and when I'm ready to move into the future with you. And an important part of showing how sincere you are there is to not rush them, but to say something like, I understand I've broken your trust. I may have done this. If the person has done it repeatedly, they would say, I've done this repeatedly. And
Hmm.
so it would mean a lot to me if you could someday find it in your heart to forgive me. And here's what I'm going to do step by step to try to rebuild your trust.
Let's talk about that trust and forgiveness. Um, is forgiveness just forgetting? I know that's um, from a Christian point of view. We just may want to feel we have to bury it really quickly. But is forgiving for forgetting? Of course, I'm going to say it's not, but I'll let you answer that. And how do you build trust again once there's been a hurt, a grievance?
Yeah. Well, Eric, I'm glad you asked the question about forgiving and forgetting. I was interested in the same thing. I thought, is this something Hallmark created or is this in the Bible? Where is this? And so I went to the actual scripture and what it says is that you will not remember it anymore, and that, we have to translate from the Greek and the Hebrew, and the problem is that they didn't have the same words for what we have. There might have been like 3 different words, and then the English translators just pick one. And so what the word literally means is to not bring it up to them again, or to not throw it in their face.
It's good.
But they're not talking about that we can control what we remember, because certainly we can't. I've had hurts in recent years with some friends, and I know how vexing it is. Like it can be like a TV channel that we just can't change. And I've been writing down different cognitive things that I've tried to be able to move on and have it not be a distraction. And especially in the case where one of these people just doesn't want to work it out, they're more like a hit and run person. It's really hard because you're left holding the bag. And so what we've done in our book, The 5 Apology Languages, is we're giving people tools for how to feel like, okay, I've done what is right for myself before God to try to heal this relationship. And if you apologize using all 5 apology languages, there can be a nice sense of completion. Like, I think I've given a complete apology. Let me ask the person, is there something else that you want to hear me say or see me do? And just trying to keep those lines of communication open when there is a problem with a person is really big. You said at the outset, Eric, that people want their apologies and they can go a long, long time with broken relationships. And my passion, along with Gary Chapman's, is to have people be restored in their relationships as quickly as possible.
Yes.
We don't want people to go decades not speaking to relatives. And sometimes they don't even remember what the problem was in the first place. We want people to be restored and to be in fellowship with each other.
Yeah, that's such, this concept is so huge, but we're not taught this. That's why I'm a huge fan of the apology languages. But what do you do? What do you do if somebody doesn't know theirs? Because that's one of the things when I teach on communication, conflict resolution, I always tell people, you know what? You may get really good at this. You may really get good at apologizing, sharing what you need. But how do you teach this to somebody else? Which I need to tell everyone that if you want to go and get do the assessment, right? They can find that on your site, or how do they find out where to do find out their apology love language?
Right. Yeah, we've made the profile free, just like the love language profile is. And I have both of those on my website, drjenniferthomas.com, under the free resources tab. We want people to be able to go in there and find out what it is that you're really looking for in an apology. And our hope is that we'll just open conversation for people. And even if you don't take the assessment, or the person, I recommend learning the apology language for anyone who you see or work with every day. So if you don't know what they're waiting to hear, you can ask them 2 questions. The first one is, when you hear a really good apology, what is included? And the second one is the opposite. It's when you hear an apology that stinks, what makes it so bad, or what is missing? And chances are that their answers are going to let you know what their primary apology language is. Now, you can still use all 5, but what you want to do is be sure that you don't leave out what they're waiting to hear, so that you don't miss each other, but you can really work together to figure out where things went wrong and what they need to see from you to be able to get it back on track. And another thing, to your point about teaching on apologies, and what do I do if I'm well trained in this, but my people are not?
Yeah.
I've had readers say to me, this has been good, because I just felt like people's apologies were very dissatisfying to me, but I couldn't identify what I needed to hear. And so our book is really a treatise on what you might be needing to hear in an apology and why. And people are using it to be able to express to others, you know what, I'm learning something really interesting. Here's what I need to hear in order for that apology to really hit home with me. At the same time, just as with the 5 love languages, if you're not getting what you want, you can kind of translate what they're doing or trying to do, and you can give them partial credit for that as well.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like it takes a lot of humility to ask that question. So say, hey, like, what's the best way that I can apologize to you, or what's good in an apology to you, or what's not so good. So yeah, that humility is such a key. But in a professional setting, I'm just thinking in some corporate office.
Hmm.
Um, are these two mushy gushy, or have you seen this work well? Does it work well? Do people get into like the staff development type training, or like does this really work? So let me just kind of coming at it. I mean, I know it does, but coming at it from like a skeptic, like
Right.
is just this too touchy feely for the corporate world?
Right. Well, my last name is Thomas, so I believe in the doubting Thomases who are gonna say, how do I really use this
Yeah.
in the workplace? And we are really seeing that it is having a big impact for people because it's opening the dialogue about offenses are inevitable, and
Hmm.
we know that when there's an offense, it creates a barrier between us and the other person, whether that's at home or at work. And the problem is, if you don't get those barriers resolved, then you've got a wall between the two of you. And at work, you're not able to work productively. You're not going to be able to get that team going so that you can meet whatever goals you've set for that month or that quarter. And so
Hmm.
we're using it with teams, and we're posting what the results are so that when people need to apologize to a coworker, they can go and look at the list or pull up the list on their computer and make sure that they don't leave out what the other person is likely most waiting to hear.
Yeah, I could see this everywhere you work at nonprofits, schools, corporations, having like someone's profile and like what their love languages are, what their apology language is.
Hmm.
But how do you know? So, not every mistake is a sin. Not every offense is a sin per se. It's not always like moral failure. It could be just, I don't know, something small like a misunderstanding.
Hmm.
How do you know when to approach something and when to let it go? Because Proverbs talks about overlooking an offense. So we know that there's times just to let things go. So how do you know? Do you have some advice for someone who somebody offended them and maybe they don't know whether they should just let it go or they need to approach them?
Right. Yeah, Eric, I think that's an important topic because we, step on people's toes or put our foot in our mouths all the time. And the problem is that maybe the more likely we are to do that, the less likely we are to realize it, right? If you're a
Mm,
bull in the china shop kind of person, you're probably not realizing that, and you're probably not going to apologize for it. But it can really impact your culture at work. In the extreme, it can cause a rift where people don't want to talk to us, don't want to work with us, and don't
mhm,
trust us. And we recently released a second book. Gary Chapman and I, plus a psychologist named Paul White, released a book called Making Things Right at Work, where we
mm.
talk about these toxic cultures, conflict resolution, and rebuilding trust through apologies when they're needed. But the challenge is, so maybe I'm hurt or offended, but you don't know it. So,
Mhm.
to your question, do I let you know that? And if so, how? And I'll just tell you, you mentioned sin. We know sin has an I in the middle, right? That's how you
Mhm.
spell sin. And and so we are all self-centered, and we're going to do things that we don't realize. And so I've actually tended to give people a pass the first time around,
Mhm.
right? Because if you confront people every time you're not happy with something, you can actually get kind of compulsive about that. And it may be that they were just one off that day, not having a good one. And so I would wait and then see if it even happens again. But if you notice that it's becoming a pattern, then I think it's reasonable to ask the person if you can talk it over. I would not do this through email or text. I
Right.
believe that those two media are reserved for things that are either neutral or positive topics. But once we're dealing with something awkward or crunchy, we need to do it voice to voice, telephone, Zoom, or in person. And so the way I would jump into it is say, I'd like to circle back to something that didn't sit well with me. I don't know, if you were not having a good day, or maybe you weren't feeling well, because usually this happens. And say something positive, like usually you're very respectful to me, you don't raise your voice, whatever. But I noticed recently, and I would just bring up the most recent incident to start. But
Right. Not like a long list of stuff.
right, right. Yeah, that could be maybe a follow-up if they want to know more about it or if they ask, but I would just start with the most recent one. And then I would talk about the situation, the behavior, and the impact. At the Center for
Mm.
Creative Leadership, they teach that as SBI. So I would tell them, in this situation, this was your behavior that I observed or what I saw, and the impact it had on me was
Mm.
X, Y, and Z. You raised your voice in the meeting, and it made me feel uncomfortable. In fact, I wanted to head for the hills.
Yeah.
And I'll give you bonus points if you can make them laugh. Bring in some humor
Right.
and lighten it while still getting your message across. Like, hey, I'm going to call you on this because it's not good for the team. And I think you're better than that. And then listen to their answer and restate their main points back to them. Like, don't be forming a rebuttal in your head, right?
Right. Right. Let them. Yeah. Like let it sink in.
Yeah, listen, take notes even.
Hmm.
Let them know, hey, what you're saying is really important. Let me get this down. And then say it back to them and ask them if you got it right.
This is such a good issue. A good practical ways, right? To communicate, do conflict resolution, stuff that we're not taught. I always say that we're
Right.
always taught the technical skills, like how to program the computer, how to do engineering or nursing or teaching, but then later in life we have to learn the soft skills, which
Hmm.
the soft skills, even though it's difficult, but these communication skills just aren't taught as they need to be. So
Yes.
let's go back to what you were saying about not texting, and I'd say even avoiding email. I mean, I think there's a time when you want to write something out, maybe you want to document what you said, and there's reasons to send an email, but I would say, and I want to know what you think, that most of this interpersonal conflict needs to be done face to face, because texting can just make it worse. Emailing can just make it worse. I know a time when I was on a group text with some coworkers, and someone sent a text to that group, and it was offensive to me,
Oh,
and
no.
I wrote this response, and I had all the zingers. I knew how to put this person in their place, and of course all that's pride and all that's hurt, but I wrote this text out, and I was convicted then to wait, and I was scared because I thought I actually sent it,
Mm.
and luckily I did not send it. And I just picked up the phone and I called him, and he was like, and I told him how I interpreted that text, and he's like, oh no, like I didn't mean it like that at all. It was a quick call, it resolved everything. And I think, oh my gosh, what would have happened if I would have sent that text? So can
Right.
you speak into that about how this face to face, or at least a phone call, is so much better?
Absolutely. So, what we know is that we need to be able to read people's body language, right? So,
Mhm.
when you are apologizing, we don't want you to have your arms crossed. You need to be open. And none of the body language comes across when we are typing. Another problem is that they are injecting their own voice over whatever we type, tone of
Mm.
voice, cadence, anger, frustration. They might read all of that in when we don't intend it. And so I tell people, don't hand off that. Don't let them apply their own voice to your words. You want to say your words
Mm.
the way you want to say them, with your tone of voice, directly to them. So you're going to need to do that, with audio, video, or in person. so that hopefully your good intentions and your sincerity are really going to come across.
Yeah, there's so much more meaning when you have the tone and the context and the body language. Yeah, that's a huge thing. To me, that would solve half our problems just by having these talks
Right.
over the phone, at least if not in
Mhm.
person. But what do you do when someone they're they're not the apologizing type, or they have a difficult time apologizing, maybe from their family? They didn't come from a family who apologized, they swept things under the rug, or they say you're too sensitive. But there's always people that don't want to apologize, or maybe they don't feel like they can. So how do you help someone who doesn't know how to do this well?
Right. Well, we talk about in our book that definitely your family of origin has an impact on this. You might have gotten the message if you apologize or if you admit you were wrong about something, they might have treated you like you are a mistake instead of
Mm,
you made a mistake. And that will cause people to learn I really should hide my mistakes. I shouldn't admit them. And so I encourage parents, if you have a child who you're teaching to apologize, make sure that you're forgiving towards them if you're able to, and don't pile on or say and another thing. Don't lecture them, but help them to see that apologies work and they make a real difference. And so another thing that we say is if someone's older and they're not in the habit of apologizing, you can still teach an old dog new tricks.
mm,
So I encourage people, if they're not getting the apologies they want, to ask for them. I remember a wife who told me after one of my talks, she said, you know what, I get so mad at my husband because if we have an argument and I think he owes me an apology, he won't say it, but that night or the next day he might bring me roses.
mm.
And it backfires. She actually wants to throw those roses in the trash or break them over her knee in front of him. That's how mad she is. And I'm thinking, don't do that. Just give me the roses. But what she realized is that she could translate those partially. She can say, well, he does kind of know he's wrong, and I can enjoy these because that's part of his apology. At the same time that she's translating, she can tell him, you know, it would really mean a lot to me if you could say, I'm sorry, or I was wrong when you do, and then name the behavior again and the impact that it had on you. Don't be afraid to ask someone for what you really want to hear. And don't just sweep it under the rug, because we know that that only causes problems. I'll tell you another group of people that doesn't really like to apologize is teenagers. And I've
Mm.
got a couple of them myself here in North Carolina. And, you know, I don't want them off in therapy saying, my mom made me apologize. She wrote the book on apologies. And, you know,
Yeah.
um, so we have to, it's a fine line we have to navigate. But something I've been using recently that other people might want to try is I'll just say to them, I was offended by what you said to me or how you said that to me. And then I just leave it there for them to think in their head, oh, there's a barrier here. I've been
Mm.
offensive. There's a block between mom and me. Am I willing to do anything to work that out? And so for me, that helps me to not be too controlling without sweeping it under the rug either.
Yeah, and I would think in general, the more you value the relationship, then you want to do these things well. And if you're in a
Mm-hmm.
corporate situation, you value the relationship, but you also probably value the team or just the harmonious work environment. So I always say that you teach people how to treat you, and this is a really
Yes.
good way that you can do that.
Right. And you raise a good point there. Many of us haven't been taught to tell others when we are offended. You know, I've even had to learn that, and I find a lot of the women I counsel, and, you know, people pleasers in general, they're not going to say, ouch, or, you know, that was awkward what you just said. Is there something behind that? What am I missing? pull anger out of people instead of running from it.
Mm.
A phrase you can use is this: I'm not sure what you meant by that. And
That's
that kind of
good.
stops the action and gets them to surface whatever hostility you might have been feeling that was under there. And an interesting thing is sometimes if you ask them, what did you mean by that? Or I'm not sure I understood that. Can you say it again? They will soften it and make it more appropriate sometimes as well.
Yeah, that is really good. For bigger offenses, you know, we have been hurt or we've hurt someone, and how do we forgive? But trust is something different, and I like what you talk about this in the book. Is that trust takes time to build, and sometimes we equate forgiveness, and just to say that apologizing is just a doorway to forgiveness, and it makes people, apologize easier. But even if all that's been done, trust takes time to build, especially when the grievance is a big thing. So, can you just speak into that? What's the difference between forgiving and apologizing versus building that trust again?
Right. Well, one of our challenges is that we've lost a theological term that fits in right between apologies and forgiveness, and that is forbearance.
Mm.
And Gary Chapman, who is a senior pastor, taught me this. He said, you know, if a person is unrepentant, we're never told in the Bible that we have to forgive them. What we need to do is to make sure we don't grow bitter towards them or be hateful towards them. We should pray for them and forbear, which is releasing them to God for judgment. So having open hands, being willing to receive them and to talk it through. And then forgiveness is actually a transaction. It's where we confess our sins and God forgives us. We hear that in 1 John 1, 8 and 9 and other places in the Bible. There's an if-then quality to forgiveness. If you study what it's really about, you're asking the other person to carry your debt or pay the price for the mistake that you made. And you're acknowledging that you're willing to carry that and you're not going to keep throwing it up in their face, as we mentioned earlier. And that's a big ask when you ask someone to forgive you.
It is.
Yeah, and sometimes it can be scary. It's like kind of like you're getting down on your knees in front of them. And some people are not comfortable in that posture, but for a really serious offense, that's appropriate. Another thing you can do to underscore your sincerity is to write out your apology and then read it to the person, but give them the written copy. And that way, if they want to remember the things that you said in your apology, they've got it, that they can go back and reread it. Because our words are really like a vapor. We in one ear and out the other. But if it's a repeated or offense or something that cut you to the quick, you may want to be able to go back and read again all the things that they covered. And hopefully they were specific in the apology that they wrote out. And so it becomes a gift that can keep on giving to you.
Yeah, and I think for some people, they may say, oh, well, this is work, or this takes effort, or I have to learn this. I have to take this apology assessment, or to learn my friends and my family and my coworkers' apology language, or, I don't have time to write things out. But I'd say, man, what is worse? A little bit of effort or a toxic work environment or tension, because who wants to walk into work with tension with that same person? Who wants to come home with tension? So yeah, what would you say to someone who says, this takes work, I have to learn it and I'm not sure I have time for it?
Right. Yeah, I would say I don't think you have time not to pay attention to this. It's the quality of our relationships that really drives a lot of our satisfaction in life, both at work and at home. And I talk to a lot of people who say, I don't like Sunday afternoons and evenings because I start to dread going back to work. And what we know is that people join companies and they leave people. They leave coworkers who they can't stand or managers. And so we don't want companies to have to keep hiring and replacing people. We need to train them in how to be able to address conflict and get it resolved. And one key in that, I'll just toss this out, is making good attributions about other people's motives. And if you feel like someone is maligning your motives, there's a section in our newer book, Making Things Right at Work, that talks about how you can surface that and bring resolution so that you can be able to trust the person again. Because if I think that you mistrust my motives, or you think I'm trying to make you look bad, or I'm trying to take all the credit, we're not going to do really well. So that needs to be aired out and the conflict resolved so that we can work hand in hand.
Yeah, that's so good. What would you say though to somebody, they have this grievance. They didn't read the book. This is like 20 years of conflict. Something happened to a family member. They're not talking to each other. And we see this all the time, just strange and strained relationships. Let's say that you don't even know if you were at fault back then, 10 years ago, or they're at fault, or it's probably some of you and some of them. But let's say someone listening wants to make amends, and it's been a while, and they're not sure how to do it. And they want to, I don't know, should they pick up the phone? Should they write a letter? What's the best way for them to kind of start that reconciliation process?
Yeah, well, I really feel for people who've had this, like, sort of a hand held up. Don't come any closer. I don't want to deal with you. I don't want to work this out. It's a terrible feeling, and I see it a lot. I think it's also a big effect of divorce in America. There's a syndrome called parental alienation syndrome that really concerns us, where we're seeing one parent kind of poison the kids against the other parent to the point where the kids question the motives of even a caring and loving parent. And the child will sometimes cut off that parent. And we hope, at age 18 that they might find their way back. Another time where they'll sometimes be open to rebuilding the bridges is when they have their own children. But I think just maintaining a stance of openness and humility and continuing to try to show care in any way that they'll receive from you. But I know it's really hard. It can start to feel like, well, it's been so long, you haven't responded, it's just too late. And what we say to that is, it's never too late.
Yep.
And whether you pick up the phone or send a note, might be a good thing if they've said they really don't want to hear from you. If sending a note wouldn't even cross their boundaries, then you could do that. And I would just make sure that you reread your note or have a friend read it to pull out anything that could sound defensive or blaming. Because blame is a hot potato. None of us want to keep it. We want to pass it to the person on the left. And sometimes we do that even as we're trying to reconcile. We want to say, well, I know this was partly my fault, but they might be thinking, no, it's all your fault.
Yep.
So I would just include plenty of statements about why they matter to me and my love or commitment. If it's, in the workplace, you're not going to use love, but a synonym is appreciation. Like, I really appreciate you as a person and what you bring to our team. And so I'd like for us to be able to get back to where we can talk civilly.
Yeah, it's something that I found helpful that opens the door, that even if you think it's 95% your fault, their fault, like you think,
right,
vast majority, they did it. But if you can find that 5%, that 1%, whatever small percent that you could have done better and apologize for that, I think that humility can open the door for a bigger reconciliation. What do you think about that?
Yes, I agree with that. And I like that you didn't go all the way down to 0%, because some people will say, apologize even if you don't know what you did wrong. And we actually say, no, apologies need to be reserved for when you understand what you're apologizing for. We don't believe in peace at any price. We want all of your apologies to be sincere. And so you need to know what it is that you've done or that you wish you had handled better. And if you don't know that, then you're not in the space of making an apology. You're in the space of having a conversation. And so do that. Say to the person, this is really important. I want to fully understand how you see this and what you need. And here's a phrase that can sometimes help bridge the gap. That is, say what you wish. For example, saying to the person, I really wish I had handled that differently. I understand better now how that impacted you, and I wish I could go back and rewind it. I would certainly handle things the way you're saying, if that's true. And if you notice, I didn't use the word apology yet, but they may feel validated, which is one of the blessings of apologies. And so that can be a powerful tool for trying to get relationships back on track.
What about saying I'm sorry, not because you did anything wrong, but you're sorry for how that made them feel? So you're not apologizing for what you've done if you don't think you've done anything wrong, but you're sorry for how that impacted them.
Yeah, that's getting into some thick weeds, because one of people's pet peeves is, I'm sorry for what I did. To the extent that you were offended, I'm sorry, which kind of translates badly. It translates to, I'm sorry you're so sensitive.
Yeah, it's true.
So what we suggest is using I wish instead. Like, I wish I could help you know how much I care about you. I wish I could have sidestepped this problem. I wish I could just erase that whole situation. This is terrible what we're dealing with together now. So you just want to come around and stand beside them, but making sure that you're not making them sound like they're a really sensitive person. We want to validate them and the pain that they have.
Yeah, and oftentimes, when we have committed an offense, we have the hardest time forgiving ourselves. So I'll just throw this out as kind of the last question. How do you forgive yourself? Because I know sometimes I can berate myself, beat myself up for mistakes, and I'm trying to receive grace and just, let it go, make amends. But we often have the hardest time forgiving ourselves. Can you just speak into that? Like, why is that? And what's something that we can do to forgive ourselves?
Right. This is such an important topic that we've included a section on it in the 5 apology languages. It's back to that thing of, I wish I could change the channel on my mind. I keep ruminating about this, and how do we get past it? So we talk about, if the person isn't there for you to apologize to, maybe they've passed on, they're out of your life, they're gone. How do you begin to forgive yourself? And one thing that we recommend is writing out sort of an apology for what you did. And then you can even journal, what would it look like to receive forgiveness for that? And write that out as well. And we've heard from people who've done this process that they find over time that they're not beating themselves up as much about it. I do want to encourage people to look at your self-talk, to try to talk to yourself as kindly as you talk to your friends. And if that's a really big struggle for you, consider finding a psychologist like me or a coach who can help you look at where that comes from and help you clear that out so that you are able to forgive yourself and move on.
Such good stuff. I could chat with you for another hour on this, but I think you've given the listeners such good information. This topic is so important. It's worth doing the work. So I just tell everyone right now, go to the website, take the assessment, do it with your significant other, share it with your team at work. But, life is short, and we don't want to live with tension. So these apology languages are so good. So thank you so much for being on the show today. Check out the book, The 5 Apology Languages. And Dr. Thomas can be found again at drjenniferthomas.com, right? I get that right?
You got it. Absolutely. And thank you for shining a light on this important topic.
Thank you so much, Jennifer.
You're welcome.